The way I've been doing things has worked pretty well so far, but the 1990s has brought along a monsoon of independent creators trying out animation for themselves, which is great when it's like Pixar and you can group all of their movies all together, but a lot of these independent creators were, extremely independent, and you can't really make a video on all of Joe Schmo's 1990s animated movies when he only made a single one, which is why to wrap up the 1990s, we're doing this video to add all of the random movies from this decade that we couldn't fit into another video to our ranking. It just so happens that there are 10, but I didn't cull any from the list to make that happen, just ended up being that I found 10 independent movies that seemed important enough to add to the video. Of course, if I skipped a movie that you really wanted to see, just comment with the hashtag, hashtag add this movie you fool, and tell me which one I missed, and I'll maybe see that comment, and maybe add your movie to the ranking in another video at some point later. I don't know, let's just get started. I'm not gonna bother trying to appeal to the algorithm this time around, because the general idea of this video kinda screwed me over in that regard, plus it just never works when I try anyway. Basically, just use the timestamps in the description if you don't care about a particular segment, and enjoy the show. DuckTales the movie Treasure of the Lost Lamp is basically just Aladdin with a much longer name and if every aspect of the movie was worse. But honestly, as a kid, I think I actually would have liked this movie a lot, and I still kinda like it now. It wouldn't really be fair if I went into this and said, this is a movie for kids, and I'm not a kid, and I don't like it, because that's just kind of a dumb and shallow take that doesn't really say anything about the movie's actual worth as what it's trying to be. Because even though this is a movie about DuckTales, and I'm not exactly in its target demographic, I actually thought it was pretty decent anyway. The beginning of the movie in the desert and in the pyramid really does not set a good first impression though, but really quick, I just want to clarify what I actually meant by saying that this is a worse version of Aladdin. I mean, mainly the fact that it has a magic lamp with a genie that switches hands a couple of times, resulting in a climax that almost causes several world-ending biblical events, which then ends with the genie being freed, although in this one he becomes a real boy instead, so I don't know, I guess this movie is also Pinocchio too. And then it's worse because every part of it is worse. The animation, the characters, the story in general. Realistically, a lot of this movie kind of sucks. I'm not even sure where to start. Maybe just with the fact that the animation isn't really, the best. I mean, there's some pretty huge sets in this movie, and a lot of them look pretty decent, Duckburg for one, but you can't deny the very apparent straight-to-VHS look that this movie has. Shares a lot of characteristics with Return to Jafar, and that's not a good thing. I mean, this guy literally pops into existence on the right side of the screen here. The characters don't exactly have the most established personalities, but I figure that's just because most of the people watching this movie already know them anyway, and I doubt that director Bob Hathcock was really doing this because he cared deeply about the source material. Speaking of the source material, maybe I'm not as up to date on my DuckTales lore as I thought I was, but I have no idea who the girl is, or this pilot guy. Luckily, the movie doesn't really require you to actually know anything about these characters beyond what I had in the back of my mind from Mickey's House of Villains, which I appreciate. Basically, the only thing you have to know is that Scrooge is the quintessential rich white capitalist Englishman, and that's something basically everybody already knows anyway. I think the weirdest part of this movie is the villain, who's a wizard named Murloc, which by the way is a combination of the words Merlin and Warlock, which is actually a sneaky Easter egg that cleverly foreshadows the fact that he's a wizard. Beat you to it, new rock stars. He used to have the magic lamp in the past, but then some random guy who's now dead stole it from him. So instead of actually going into his tomb and getting it back, he kind of just stood around the outside for centuries, deciding it would be a better use of his time to comb the desert inch by inch for the lamp when the tomb was literally right there. So then the ducks go in and get the map for the lamp instantly, and Murloc is just like, I have a genius idea. I'll let them find it, and then take it. My guy, you could have just followed this map yourself in 2000 BC and avoided this whole thing. But he does have a talisman that lets him turn into a bunch of different animals, and more importantly, lets him bypass the 3-wish limit on the lamp. And that's actually a really cool idea. The pacing in this movie is kind of weird though. Again, the first 20 minutes in the desert looking for the lamp are so agonizingly slow, and I did not feel an iota of emotion once. But then the next 20 minutes are in the house, and that was actually pretty decent. I really didn't mind this part at all. It was basically just genie shenanigans, and it was pretty cute. Honestly, I thought the genie would be way more annoying than he is. Meanwhile, the wizard and this stereotype Egyptian henchman guy with a very real accent who's voiced by this white guy, who seems to be in one episode of every show ever made, try to get the lamp back. Then we end up at this society meeting or something, and basically the rest of the movie after this is, not super interesting either, but at least the whole thing isn't in dimly lit caves, which I thought it was gonna be. So then Scrooge randomly runs into this table, which is just in the middle of the hallway, and it happened to have an identical lamp on it, which then got mixed up with the real one, which... fine. So now the bad guys have it, blah blah blah, he gets arrested and then escapes, and then there's a huge heist, which sounds very familiar to Ichabod and Mr. Toad, but it's not plagiarism since Disney made both, so I don't know. That movie did it better, in case you're wondering. Other than the fact that we've now entered that weird era at the turn of the century where Disney was obsessed with making Mickey, Donald, and Goofy themed things, DuckTales the movie is pretty much nothing worth talking about for any extended period of time, and so I'm gonna put it below Hunchback and above Ants. And yes, I will change Hunchback's spot in the ranking soon. This movie is nothing at all like what I expected, and I'm pretty sure that's a good thing. There's not a single individual scene that I thought was genuinely good, but somehow I still think that as a kid, I would have really enjoyed this. I guess it just comes down to the fact that it's really not made for people my age, duh. But as someone who has nostalgia for basically everything else from that weird era of Mickey, Donald, and Goofy content, I honestly don't think this movie was that bad at all. And I really do think that if I had seen this movie as a kid, I probably would have a huge amount of nostalgia for it. It's just got that charm, and I think if they titled this movie literally anything else, probably would have done better. But since I have no clue what this next movie is about, and I have no nostalgia for it at all, there's entirely a possibility that I will absolutely hate it.
Am I dead?
No.
We could fix that for you.
A few episodes ago, I said how The Lion King 2 didn't have a single original idea in it, but Disney actually took the time to make every single cliche in the story actually fit, and it ended up being a pretty good movie that I would gladly watch again. Fern Gully the Last Rainforest is basically the same thing, just minus the second part where they fix the issues. If DuckTales was nothing like what I expected, this is exactly what I expected. There were a few sort of interesting ideas in here, but after the 20-minute mark, I genuinely don't think that a single plot element surprised me in the slightest, because I've seen every single plot element in 100 different movies. I mean, I do actually like the themes at work here in this movie, and even though they're not developed that well, I can kind of see what they were doing. How much does that count for? I don't know. Basically, it all ties back to the idea of deforestation in some pretty interesting ways. There's this forest that humans originally came from, but then the spirit of destruction erupted from a volcano and scared them out, and all of the remaining creatures think that they just died off, but in reality, they just became the ones doing the destroying, and I think that's actually kinda cool. In present times, the main sentient creatures in the rainforest are these fairies, and the main character is this one girl whose name I refuse to learn. I think it's like Kirsten or something, and throughout the movie, she learns more and more about humankind, eventually realizing that, yeah, we kind of suck. What I really like about it is how when she first sees things like smoke or fire or the huge leveler machine, she doesn't have the slightest idea what they are. She just touches the fire because she had no knowledge that it would hurt her, and she thought that the leveler was some like huge monster that ate trees. These fairies can't even begin to like fathom what we've become because the only things they've ever seen are like pure unadulterated nature, and framing it this way, pointing out how far humanity has strayed from the nature we came from to the point where we're just a completely foreign entity, is actually really interesting, okay? I think that's pretty cool. This world is split into good and evil forces, and in a way, humans are essentially the embodiment of all of the evil in the world. Humans entering this forest was so disgusting and so offensive to the natural order of things that within like a week, the god of destruction himself was brought back from his prison. They're not pulling any punches here. Now, I'm making it sound like I really like this movie, but that's not entirely the case. All of that's really cool, but it's less what the movie's actually doing and more what it's trying to do, and sort of does for the first 10 minutes and then kind of just throws away. The themes at work here, yes, are pretty compelling, but a lot of the time, they weren't really executed well, and I think a lot of it comes down to the characters. On the one hand, I feel like I know a lot about these guys because I've seen cardboard cutouts just like them in, like I said earlier, 100 different movies, but on the other hand, again, that obviously doesn't really mean much, and none of them have any personalities. This can't be seen more clearly than with Kirsten herself. Not only does her very strange design make her kind of look like an alien creature, but she also kind of acts like one too. The only thing she ever does is ask questions about humans, and it's not even like there's a huge thing where people keep telling her to stop seeking out humans, but she just feels like she has to or anything like that, which is another cliche, so I'm surprised they didn't put that in. They mention that she shouldn't go above the canopy, like one time, and after that, every time she seeks out the leader and tells her all about her escapades with the humans who they thought were dead, they're kind of just indifferent, so it doesn't even seem like it matters that much. I just can't even really tell what she wants, and getting me invested in the character discovering the conflict is kind of important for getting me invested in the conflict itself, but the most stereotypical part comes from a different character, who we all knew would be here in some way as soon as I mentioned how cliche this movie can be, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed love interest. When I saw Zach for the first time, I actually laughed, because just by looking at his hair and the fact that he was wearing a tank top instead of flannel like everyone else, I could immediately tell that he was gonna be the love interest, and I sure wish he wasn't, because he can be very, very annoying.
And what are you supposed to be, some kind of fairy?
Of course I am. What about you? Are you really a human?
Last time I checked. Buzz off? I'm not buzzing anywhere. No, unshrink me, and I mean now.
Hey, am I on a hunger strike? Where the hell are my pancakes?
Oh boy, where did they pan this guy? Clearly not enough for him to actually speak his lines like a human being. Actually, I take that back. Zach is kind of ironically hilarious. Pretty much all of the cliches you expect are just what the movie's gonna be about for a while, and since we're already like 25 minutes in, we need about 15 for the climax, and the movie's only 75 minutes long, so that means they kinda have to speedrun the whole thing, and so the whole middle chunk of the movie feels like some sort of bad rom-com, but at breakneck speed. The fairy accidentally makes him small. Oh no! So now we have a scene where she looks through his pockets and finds human things, like a pocket knife and a wallet. Like, what? What even are those, bro? And that's basically in every movie like this. You knew this was gonna happen. And like, he has a Walkman, so obviously there's a scene later on where he shows the fairies the wonders of music. Wow, that's so cool. The fairies don't have culture, that's a human exclusive thing. But then in return, she shows him the wonders of nature, because that's a fairy exclusive thing, and I'm not even being sarcastic about that one, that one's actually true. But then like 10 minutes after they met, and like 5 minutes after they were arguing, they just immediately kiss, and it completely shifts this guy's entire worldview. So then 5 minutes after that, the humans come in and destroy the forest, and now the liar has been revealed. Oh no, the guy was working for the Leveler Machine Corporation, and he's a human. I can't believe that the human was working for the humans. Holy that's crazy. You can't do a liar revealed trope when you just met 10 minutes ago and then fell in love 5 minutes ago. So then, of course, he decides to fight against the humans because you've seen every movie like this before and you already knew this was gonna happen, and that's kind of just the whole movie. You kind of see what I mean here? I am glad that the villain is good, though. I honestly care more about Hexus than any of the good guys, mainly because he's voiced by Tim Curry, which supports my theory that Tim Curry makes an appearance in every animated movie ever made.
So, nerd, I hear you want to be a big ladies' man.
This is my favorite clip in cinematic history, by the way. It might have something to do with the fact that Hexus is the only character in the whole movie who actually personally sings a song diegetically, but this glob of sludge does kind of have a personality. Need I say more? And now that I'm looking at him, he kind of looks like Giga Chad. Also, why was he not in this skeleton form the whole time? He looks so much cooler this way. And also, this is like the most morbid death we've seen in this whole series. To be honest, the only other character I liked was the Robin Williams bat, which is the only thing I actually knew about this movie before I saw it, and he's just as good as I imagined. And he's also a cyborg, which I admit I didn't quite expect. He's just so wonderfully sarcastic, and next to these other people who only have dialogue that either moves the plot forward or moves this stupid romance forward, he looks even more impressive. And this movie actually looks pretty good. I mean, the character designs aren't really, but the backgrounds absolutely are, especially in the main rainforest area. This shot here is at the very start of the movie, and it's so good that I think it raised my expectations honestly way higher than they should have been. And yeah, there is a lot of dated CGI in this movie, which we haven't actually seen in a while, but you know what? It looks fine enough. And I guess this would be a good time to mention that the songs in this movie are kind of the worst songs I've ever heard in any of the movies in this entire YouTube channel. The only one I even like is Hexus's, probably because Tim Curry and it has some cool visuals, but the rest of them are so bad, I can't even really explain them to you. I don't know. I'm gonna put this below The Great Mouse Detective and above A Bug's Life. It's really only marginally better than the last movie, and if you ask me which one I'd rather watch right now, I'd honestly probably say DuckTales, and I'd probably continue to say DuckTales forever, but I don't know, this one's still honestly okay, and objectively, I feel like there is just more going on. I'll say the same thing I said in the Lion King 2 segment. Cliches are cliches for a reason. They work, right? And even though it would be way better if you actually used them as a foundation for a good movie, it's still entirely possible to just use them as the movie itself and not go any further than that. That's the whole reason they exist to begin with. There are some interesting themes, and I think it could be worth watching at some point if you have a little over an hour to kill, but if it had gone on any longer, I probably would have exploded. Luckily, I really don't think that's going to be an issue for the next one.
Nobody cares about me.
I do, Batman.
Now that I have the balls, I will go see the king.
A few inches later.
I'm taking my balls and leaving.
The Thief and the Cobbler, without a doubt, has the coolest lore of any movie so far. For those of you who aren't up to speed on it, let me just give you the recap. This is Richard Williams, and way back in the 60s, he first came up with the idea to make this movie, but he didn't really have the money to make it, and so it was in and out of production up until 1989. That's when the movie got picked up by Warner Brothers, who agreed to finance it. But then it went over budget and they were running out of time, and so they basically just took whatever they had, which was basically nothing, edited a bunch of it together, cut a whole bunch out, and shipped it off, and there was nothing that Williams could even really do about it, which really sucks. That version was called The Princess and the Cobbler, and people did not like it. Then 2 years later, Disney re-released it with the title Arabian Night, with a K, and people still did not like it, and people thought that it was really crummy that this guy's magnum opus wasn't allowed to reach its full potential, and then a second time was also not allowed to reach its full potential, or honestly anywhere close to it. Enter The Thief and the Cobbler, the re-cobbled cut, a fan-made project compiling footage from both movies and Williams' own archive of work. It's still not perfect, far from it, but it's about as close to his original vision as we'll ever get, and that's the version I watch, because to be honest, I have zero interest in seeing any other version. But you want to know the crazy part? Even though this is basically half a movie, it's still somehow one of the greatest things ever. I mean, there are a lot of parts I don't like, and the unfinished animation in some spots can really take you out of it, but the stuff in this movie that delivers better than almost anything else that I've ever seen in my entire life. It's one of the coolest movies I've ever seen. I absolutely love this movie's animation style. The first half is so abstract and weird, and I couldn't be happier. I've never seen anything like this, and the only way for you to really fully comprehend is for you to just watch it on YouTube right now. Fantasia's probably closest, but even that doesn't come close to describing the pure visual insanity and beauty that is this movie. It all comes down to the fact that the Golden City is made of checkers, and so everything always feels like an optical illusion. A lot of the time, you can't tell if you're looking at a floor or a wall, and it makes so many of the scenes in this movie feel like a mural come to life. It's so creative and interesting. Everything in this movie feels like it has some sort of underlying pattern in it, and those patterns feel like they were all carefully picked to make the entire movie look like a geometric nightmare, in a good way, and it just kept my interest the whole time. I didn't want to look away because I knew at any moment I could see something that defied all laws of, just all laws. That scene where Tack is chasing the thief through this weird black and white limbo land is hands down probably my favorite animated scene ever because of how wild it is, and the designs for Tack and the thief are both so perfect. Their movements are just so fluid and fit their personalities so well. Using the tacks in Tack's mouth as his facial expressions is a brilliant idea, and the fact that the thief is basically made of jello and can compress himself into a thin sheet or stretch his body into basically any shape is pretty much perfect for him. The first half of this movie in the city was almost flawless. I loved it. The story was pretty simple, and watching these surprisingly endearing characters just exist and try to do things was such a fun time. 10 out of 10, seriously. The villain was pretty good, and he kind of looks like a combination of the Genie and Flint Lockwood, and the movie's actually pretty funny. There are so many genuinely good visual gags in this movie, and keep in mind that neither of the main characters speak even once. Well, okay, Tack speaks once, and it's horrifying.
I love you.
I love you.
But still, that's really impressive, and it just made me have an even better time. And the music, it's so magical and beautiful. Like, tell me this isn't the most beautiful thing you've ever heard. But I have to wonder if some of it was recobbled from, like, random places. Come on, bro, you can't fool me. But anyway, it's truly amazing. But all those compliments were about the first half of the movie. That first half was fantastic, one of the best things I've ever seen, seriously. It had a basic and well-told story, and some great visuals as well. Perfect pacing, perfect setting, perfect everything. So what happens when the second half of the movie takes us out of the city? Yeah, well, it loses the plot, the animation takes a complete nosedive, there are no checkers to be seen, the characters have lost all of their charm, the movie starts taking itself way too seriously, a lot of the jokes aren't funny, I wasn't really sure what was going on, a whole bunch of other villains got shoehorned in and they're incredibly uninteresting, any time spent on them at all is completely wasted, and worst of all, we spend like 20 minutes on the most ridiculous climax I've ever seen. Tack throws a single nail at the bad guys and destroys their entire Howl's Moving Castle via the most insane Rube Goldberg machine of all time. I say that because it literally takes 20 minutes of random machines falling apart in this ridiculous chain reaction before it fully completes. There's still some stuff I like. The Grand Vizier's death has immediately taken the title of most morbid death from Hexus, and the unfinished animation makes it like a Mandela catalog-y, and it's genuinely very haunting.
You two find man's best friend. For zigzag then, it is the end.
Jesus Christ. And I like that at the end, the thief steals the movie itself. And I know that criticizing a movie whose very existence has been fought over for literal decades isn't super productive, but like, it really is kind of disappointing. The Thief and the Cobbler, Richard Williams' magnum opus, a movie with the non-stop weirdness of Alice in Wonderland but done well, a movie with some of the most instantly likable characters and amazing visuals I've ever seen, a movie that seemed to defy all expectations, still couldn't quite defy all of them. There just wasn't enough. The recobbled cut is without a doubt an incredibly successful project, but as harsh as it might sound, it didn't quite succeed enough for me, and I don't really see any way that it could have. It's not like his archives were gonna have the entire completed movie. If they did, Warner Brothers would have just shipped that out the first time around, and this project wouldn't have even been necessary in the first place. But even though I still like the movie overall, I don't know. I can't help but feel a little bit sad anytime I think about it, especially because Aladdin is apparently a total ripoff of it, and now that I've seen both, I mean, yeah, I can kind of see it. I'm gonna put it below The Fox and the Hound and above The Little Drummer Boy, the lowest movie on the list that I love, and I do genuinely love it. This movie is kind of beyond words, but like, the fact that I and so many other people do love this movie means that all of the work behind it was actually worthwhile. Even though this isn't objectively the most polished movie I've ever seen, it's definitely one of my favorites, no matter what my spot on the ranking tells you. And that's honestly really great. Definitely watch it sometime.
The bulls are gone! My kingdom will come to destruction and death!
I wanna be Santa Claus, so I'm gonna kill Santa Claus.
I went into The Nightmare Before Christmas expecting it to be overhyped, and now that I've actually watched it, it is more overhyped than I ever could have possibly imagined. I just think a really big chunk of it just isn't that interesting. Sorry, I guess. With that being said though, the movie looks really good, and I want to point that out right now from the very start. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Stop motion is the most timeless form of animation, because there are no advances in the technology of making a figure, taking a photo, moving it a bit, and then taking another photo. Nothing can really age badly. The quality of your movie is almost entirely dependent on the skill of the people making it. And that's why I have so much respect for it. Look at the wide range of emotions on Jack's face. Every time his face changes, they either had to go in there and change it, or replace Jack entirely with a completely different Jack. Stop motion demands such a high level of effort and endurance to not just draw or computer generate your world, but actually make it, and make characters of your own creation live in it, one moment at a time. And the reality of everything you're looking at usually comes across, and I think that's why a lot of stop motion movies have so much charm. And all the sets really are charming, especially the North Pole and the Christmas stuff, but even Halloween Town feels like a real place, because on a smaller scale, it is a real place. There are so many cool details that just elevate the spookiness. Here's my hot take though. Even though I like Jack's spindly design a lot, and I think it really suits his character, that's kind of the only design that I like, and I'm pretty sure it's just a me problem, because they are well designed, but personally, creepy stuff just isn't my thing. I'm just not really gonna be that into a story where Santa looks like this. But I do actually like Jack as a character though. The idea that he's bored with scaring kids and then falls in love with the magic of Christmas is such a neat idea, and I thought seeing him become basically a Christmas fanboy was actually pretty cute. And I really like the scene where he finally realizes that all the time he's spent trying to analyze the point of Christmas is kind of pointless, because there isn't really a point, and that the holiday is just happy times for the sake of happy times. Good for goodness sake, if you will. I thought where this was going is that the people of Halloween Town would end up not liking the changes Jack tries to make, forcing him to return to his old ways, and then it's really sad or something like that. But all of the villagers are actually super okay with Halloween Town also celebrating Christmas, and so Jack is able to go on his merry way, celebrating the holiday by kidnapping Santa Claus and replacing him, distributing toys that exclusively commit acts of terrorism. In fact, he's so bad at being Santa that the entire world puts him as public enemy #1, and the combined governments of the whole planet immediately shoot him out of the sky. I'm sorry, what? I really don't like this idea. The idea was cool at first, but now it's just been completely ruined for me. The whole movie was about Jack being exhausted with scaring people, and being absolutely in love with the magic of Santa and the happiness Christmas brings. But then he immediately uses the magic of Santa to start spreading fear again. The whole thing he doesn't want to do anymore. So then he's like, aw shucks, I sure did ruin Christmas, and he sings a whole song about it. But like, bro, how is that a surprise to you at all? What else could your end goal possibly have been? This is kind of the same issue we had with Only Yesterday back in the last video, where I just have no idea what they were even trying to say here. Meanwhile, this subplot with the Frankenstein girl is not interesting at all, and I don't understand how she thinks that drugging Howard the Duck here is gonna give her a chance to escape when he's woken up and caught her every single time. And at the end, she and Jack fall in love, because of course they do, even though there were no clues that that was ever gonna happen. And Boogie Woogie, or whatever his name is, honestly just makes the movie so much more boring and racist. Everything about him or surrounding him and his obnoxious kids feels so slow, and he doesn't even really need to be in the movie at all. Jack really doesn't want Boogie Woogie to get involved with the whole Santa kidnapping thing, so what does he immediately do? Ask his children to be the ones to kidnap Santa. So then we get this forced climax where Jack is trying to, like, what is he even trying to do here? I don't know. And what exactly is Boogie Woogie's end goal? Why does he want to keep Santa locked up? His inclusion just makes things more complicated and confusing. And also, he's a white guy pretending to be black. And also, his design kind of looks like that one group of white people that don't like black people that you may have heard about, but I don't know. I only say what I see. Tim Burton, those allegations, they definitely exist. Tim Burton, but hey, on the bright side, this movie is a musical, except it's also kind of not on the bright side, so like, some of the songs follow like the Howard Ashman format that made all of the Disney Renaissance movies so great. There's an I Want song, and a villain song, and another I Want song, and I assume there's other stuff, but I don't know. Just because I can't think of songs that fit this format doesn't mean there aren't a lot of songs in this movie. That's actually kind of the problem. I think that this movie has too many songs. In 71 minutes, this movie has 11 songs, and that is a song every 6.5 minutes, and each song is like 2 to 3 minutes long, so anywhere to a third to a half of this movie is just people singing about nothing, and most of the songs aren't even really that good. We open with This Is Halloween, which is a great song. I like that song, and I like the one Jack sings in Christmas Town, but I don't really like any of the others, and it's not helped by the fact that Jack doesn't really sing and kind of just talks all of his lyrics. Like, I still respect this movie, but like, it's making it really hard to right now. I don't know, I'm just gonna put it below The Grinch and above The Fox and the Hound. I think it's funny that this movie and The Grinch kind of have the same story, and I didn't really like the execution of either. Sorry, but it's just what I think. The first half was honestly pretty good, but the second half just dragged on forever and kinda messed up anything the first half had going for it. Kinda like the last movie, actually. So maybe that explains why it's around the same area as it. And since it's shorter, it was just affected by that issue less. Thief and the Cobbler is still just way better, though. I don't know, it's just the way the list works. I'm still glad I watched this movie, I guess. It's kind of culturally significant, but I'm definitely never gonna watch it again. And I hate you, Tim Burton. I don't actually know what movie is next, though, on the list. I hope it's Space Jam. I know that's somewhere in there.
If you could play a swan, what would it sound like?
What does this mean?
It was, in fact, not Space Jam. In fact, originally I wasn't even gonna do the Swan Princess, but then I saw it has like at least 4 sequels and figured that it was probably worth putting on the list. Even though this whole video consists of less popular movies just by nature, the middle chunk especially is really gonna dip into ones like this that very few people know or care about, so I'm gonna try to make this quick. Is what I would say if this movie was actually as bad as I was expecting it to be, but the Swan Princess kinda rocks, dude. When we watched Anastasia, I realized how much it felt right at home among the Disney Renaissance movies, and if you replace the words Don Bluth Entertainment with Walt Disney Animation Studios, I probably wouldn't question it too much, and to be honest, this movie is kinda the same way. And when we watched Pocahontas 2, I was shocked at how fantastic it was, and I still stand by that like 6 months later. A movie that I was convinced would be mediocre, if not terrible, was unironically really good, and The Swan Princess is a great example of that too. I can't believe I almost let this movie pass me by. Don't let the same thing happen to you. So when I first heard about this movie, I was thinking of Swan Lake, so I assumed that it was just gonna be like a boring princess movie that plays the Swan Lake song a bunch of times, but not only do they never play Swan Lake, it's also not a boring princess movie. The plot of this movie is actually surprisingly creative, and I honestly love it a lot. Basically, Odette is the main character, and then her father conspires with the queen of a neighboring country to get her married to her son, Prince Derek. So then once a year, they force them to get together with the hopes that their countries will merge one day, which seems very odd and abusive and manipulative, but at least they're kind of self-aware about it. The opening song is just the two kids hating each other and repeating, "This isn't my idea," but then with each verse, they grow up a little bit more. And by the end of the song, they actually genuinely love each other, and now they sing, "This is my idea," which I thought was pretty clever. This isn't really the story of them falling in love. That's the first 5 minutes. This is the story of what happens after. So then Derek is kind of a total idiot and accidentally says that he only loves Odette for her looks, and so she calls off the wedding. They both kind of realize after, actually, that was a mistake. I do kind of want to get back together with them. But, you know, the plot of the movie happens, and that gets in the way. So the villain, who we'll talk about in a second, kidnaps her and turns her into a swan. The rest of the movie is just the two lovers trying to reunite, and it's actually paced pretty well. So basically, Odette only becomes a human if she touches this specific lake when the moonlight hits it, and at all other times she becomes a swan. But instead of her having absolutely no agency, which is what every other movie would do, if it wasn't for her, the two of them never would have been able to get back together in the first place. There's this one scene where Odette is trying to get Derek to realize that she's the swan he's been chasing so that, like, she can lure him to the lake that, like, she, like, lives around. But he was chasing her because he thinks she's a demon. That's how she got him to chase her. And so he's like actively trying to shoot her down. So she needs him to realize that the swan is Odette before he shoots her. And if I'm being honest, this scene actually had me nervous. Not just aware that the movie wanted me to be nervous, but actually nervous. One of the main reasons I like this movie so much is that they put the time in to establish what these characters wanted and who they were. Those things aren't very complicated, but the fact that they were put in the movie at all is enough, honestly. And pretty much all of the characters are distinct. If there's one thing we know about otherwise good non-Disney princess movies, it's that bad villains are apparently a death sentence. But Rothbart is actually sort of interesting. He's by no means my favorite character or anything, but I think his presence makes more sense than Rasputin's did in Anastasia. I like that he has a history with Odette's father, and I especially like that instead of taking the kingdom for himself, he knows that to be truly accepted, he needs to get it more legitimately. And so he basically puts Odette under this swan curse until she agrees to marry him. He's not the most three-dimensional character, but he fulfills his role in the story perfectly and unintrusively. And since this movie takes place in a fairy tale land instead of early Soviet Russia, a magical wizard villain kind of actually makes sense now. And unlike Anastasia, the writers seem to realize that we couldn't care less about this guy, and so they just keep the focus on the two main characters where it belongs, relegating him to the background. And I appreciate that. This was the one thing that stopped Anastasia from being a true god tier movie, and even though I'm not saying this is a god tier movie, I am saying that it definitely handles all of this way better than that movie did. And I really like Derek's best friend here in this pretentious royal advisor guy. Every movie needs one. Odette also meets these animal friends, and when I saw them for the first time, I was filled with this sense of dread, because this is very rarely something that actually goes well, but this time it actually did go well, or at least it didn't go badly, you know? I like this snobby frog who kind of looks like Naveen. I want to be this turtle who sounds like a combination of Eeyore and Patrick Warburton.
You think he's dead?
And even though this Puffin guy feels like he's trying to be the genie with his impressions and stuff, and it's not working, I even ended up liking him by the end. And I just want to mention one more time how much chemistry Derek and Odette have for basically no reason. I don't know, their romance just feels really believable to me. And I love that the spell only breaks when Derek can finally find the words to explain why he loves her. It's just such a cool way of tying things back to the beginning. And by the way, the number of Chekhov's guns that actually got delivered on in this movie is insane. Honestly, I feel like the multiple songs they share are largely responsible for it, because in person, they really don't talk to each other all that much. They spend the whole movie totally separated. So yeah, this one is actually a musical too, I should probably mention that, except this time, the songs are actually really awesome, and they make so much more sense and are way more spread out, so they have more impact than being sandwiched one after the other for 2 million years. Far Longer Than Forever is right up there with the holy trinity of Once Upon a December, Journey to the Past, and If I Can Learn to Do It, You Can Learn to Do It song from Anastasia. There are some high notes in here that actually made me stand up, clap vigorously, and announce to the whole world, this is the greatest movie of all time. I loved when they said, it's swannin' time, and swanned all over the place, and then everyone clapped. Seriously though, those high notes are genuinely great.
Far longer than forever, as constant as a star.
The amount of vibrato that this guy has on every single note he makes is just so impressive, and this next one especially. Every time I think I know what this note sounds like, the next time I hear it, it still manages to surprise me with its sheer magnificence. And the reason I'm spending so much time building it up is because of that. Just listen.
Far longer than forever, like no love ever known.
I don't think I've ever heard two humans sing so perfectly in sync in my entire life. They've got to be within 1 hertz of perfect pitch. It's perfect. You know what? Let's hear it again.
Like no love ever known.
Oh my god, dude, it's so good. And also the animation is amazing. Nothing has that many lines, and it just makes the whole world seem like a watercolor painting. The swan transformation scenes in particular really feel like a storybook come to life, and I really like all the environments too. For all of the outdoor scenes in this movie, I was really surprised that all of the different forests didn't just blend into each other, and the stuff in the towns is just amazing. This castle is gorgeous, and some of the interiors have so much detail. The character designs are all pretty basic, but I really only disliked one, and now that I'm saying this, I don't think I can even remember which one it was. It's just a surprisingly unique story with really good pacing, and I was checking the time way less while watching it. I was just more invested. You could even say that I liked it more. You could say that because it's true, and I do. Prince Derek is probably in my top 10 favorite princes, right up there with Prince Naveen, and he's definitely in the top 10 names of the princes, also right up there with Prince Naveen, and also Prince Florian. If you know which one that is, I'm very impressed. I'm gonna put it below Pocahontas 2 and above Rudolph. It really is a lot like Anastasia. A great musical with a surprisingly amazing story that I'll remember for a very long time. I literally don't have a single issue with this movie. It's just a magical, fantastic, great film that you should all watch now. Good job, Richard Rich. I'm excited to see more of your stuff in the future. Just not the 10 sequels to this movie that you apparently made. Bro thinks he's Don Bluth, SMH.
Wait, where are you going? Alaska! It's faster if you drive. Ah!
Balto is a certified fine movie. It's not that great, and it's not bad. It is simply okay. And if you look past all of the stereotypical annoying kids movie BS, it gets even better. This movie is based on that story I feel like we all had to read a passage and answer multiple choice on in English class about that team of dogs who delivered medicine 600 miles across Alaska because the entire town's worth of children was dying of diphtheria, which, not gonna lie, is a pretty good groundwork for a movie, and they executed it perfectly fine. Balto himself is nothing special, and I can't pretend that I got super invested in how nobody cared about him because he's half wolf. The villain is this one evil dog, and he's pretty one-dimensional. His three traits are that he's arrogant, he wants to have sexual intercourse with this girl dog, and he's a huge racist. So the first 20 minutes of the movie are just Balto trying to talk to the girl dog because obviously he loves her too. You kinda knew that already. You've seen a movie before. The mean dog bullies him for a little bit, his annoying sidekicks repeat the same gimmick like 4 times, Balto runs away to be sad about how he's different, this Russian goose starts comforting him, and the whole cycle kinda just starts over again, and that's like the first 20 minutes. My hopes for this movie were so low during this first act, because nothing was happening. The only developed plot thread was this little girl having a slight cough, and the only good characters were the goose, who's super endearing for some reason, and these polar bears who look like they're made of jello and have some of the greatest voice acting I've ever heard.
Oh, the shame of the polar bear who fears the water. No wonder we are shunned by our fellow bear. Woe is us.
But other than that, I thought that the next hour was gonna be insufferable. Luckily though, the movie actually managed to redeem itself a bit by finally getting on with the main plot of the movie itself. Say what you want, but I think the sickness parts had all of the desperation that was needed. They didn't undercut any of the more dire scenes with stupid jokes, and they just let them play out so we could actually get some stakes. It felt like kids were dying. I can't really say I ever got invested in the character of Balto, but I was still able to get kind of invested in the actions of Balto. There are a lot of filler obstacles to pad their runtime, and by the end you can really feel the movie's length. Like, there's one part where he's so focused on trying to find the right path back that he falls into a literal ravine, along with the medicine, and so he has to painstakingly drag himself and the giant crate of antitoxin back up the cliffside while holding the rope in between his teeth, and the other dogs just sit at the top and politely encourage him to keep going. Call me crazy, but I don't think that really happened. Then one of the dogs sneezes and starts an avalanche, which is like the most notorious filler obstacle ever. Again, you've seen a movie before, and as soon as you knew that this took place in Alaska, you probably could have guessed that this would happen. So then, you guessed it again, they get trapped in this random ice cave, and they have to dodge like 1,000 stalactites, which all decided to fall at the same time. None of it was super boring, but except for the part with the bear and Balto pulling a Napoleon and luring it out onto the ice to make it fall in the lake, but then he gets trapped under the ice himself, except for that, I wasn't really interested in, like, anything that really happened. I will say though, one of the biggest reasons why I managed to stave off boredom for so long was the animation. Alaska looks really beautiful here, and I'm glad they didn't take the approach of everything being a perfectly flat white plain in the middle of a blizzard so they didn't have to draw any backgrounds. They always put in the effort to make it look genuinely pretty. The mountains always have so many outcroppings and ridges that make them look more natural. There are actual trees and forests, you know, like actual Alaska does. It isn't just a flat snowy place, and even the snow itself has lines and shadows drawn in. I was just surprised by how much elevation, how much y-axis they put in, and I actually like the town too. There's a lot of detail on the outsides of these houses, and the interiors all feel really cozy too. And I think the character designs also work. What I have written down is that they're kind of cartoony, but they grew on me, and the bear's design where you can only see these orange and blue highlights is cool, but I gotta be honest, the only part of that I can verify is the bear thing, because try as I might, 48 hours after watching this movie, I seriously can't remember a single character design. To quote ChatGPT, Balto shines with its stunning visuals, well-developed setting, and a plot that, while incorporating familiar tropes, manages to deliver a reasonably engaging story with reasonably engaging characters. The film may have its flaws, especially with a one-dimensional villain and frequent instances of filler, but it succeeds in conveying the urgency and importance of the situation it portrays. Yeah, that works for me. Let's put it below The Jungle Book and above the Charlie Brown holiday movies. The beginning felt specifically designed to make me hate it, but it really grew on me as it went on, and I probably would have liked it from the beginning if they didn't hit us with a your mom joke like 10 minutes in. Point is, now that's 2 movies in a row that have pleasantly surprised me, although the Swan Princess is still way better, it can't even compare. I can't believe what I thought was going to be the boring middle section of the video was sort of the best part yet. The next one is Space Jam though, so that might actually be ending. Just kidding, I lied. We actually have one more before that.
James and the Giant.
Peach.
I have actually seen James and the Giant Peach before, but it was when I was really young and I don't remember anything about it except for the fact that it gave me nightmares. This is one of the first movies I ever saw that I distinctly remember watching and hating, which is probably why it took me a couple of days to even muster the strength to watch it. And oh yeah, I forgot this was a Disney movie, and more so, one that everyone really likes. So then I watched it and I gotta be honest, it's actually not that bad. I mean, I totally get why as a kid I would have been afraid of it because it's a weird-ass movie with some very eldritch horror-looking characters, but I kinda really like it anyway. It's kind of charming in how peculiar it is. Like a series of unfortunate events, and we'll see that in a second. One thing I don't remember at all is that Jimmy Boy here is actually a live-action kid, and a pretty good chunk of the movie just isn't animated at all. He only becomes stop-motion because he takes LSD that he got from some strange man. So like 2 minutes into the movie, the narrator informs us that James' parents actually got eaten by a rhinoceros off screen, which is like the funniest thing ever. So then he has like a Cinderella thing going on where he basically gets enslaved by his aunts, and this is where the series of unfortunate events parallels really come into their own. These two old ladies really exemplify that unique type of ridiculous and over-the-top pure evil that show does so well, and it adds so much to this first act. So does James's I Want song actually, which is genuinely super good. It's basically about how he tries to escape from his miserable reality, and it has one of the most surprisingly deep lyrics. Then some guy shows up and says, "Hey, wanna get out of here?" And he tries to give James some drugs, and he comes up with this whole story about how they're actually crocodile tongues, and he just goes on and on about how they were made, and like, thou doth protest too much, dude. The amount of detail you just gave makes it even more likely that these are drugs. You realize that, don't you? Anyway, blah blah blah, the drugs turn into this big-ass peach, and the ants immediately capitalize on it by charging admission to see it, and James eats some of it and turns into stop motion. That's like the first 25 minutes of the movie, and I have to say, it was honestly pretty awesome. I like James, I love the ants, the plot had a great foundation, the one song so far was surprisingly good, the pacing was top-notch, and it was overall really charming. But I suspected that wouldn't last for long, because I knew that the one scene I remembered was coming next. And oh boy, is it still just as horrifying as I remember. Remember that whole spiel I went on about how much respect I have for stop motion? Yeah, this movie makes it really hard for me to remember that in this scene. Don't get me wrong, it's super fluid, and the backgrounds and the set designs are absolutely impeccable. But these are literally the worst character designs I've ever seen in my life. The characters themselves are a different story, but like half of the designs could very well give me nightmares now. It's no wonder this movie scared the hell out of me when I was like 4. Look at James, look! And this peach looks absolutely disgusting. It reminds me more of a slime mold than an actual fruit. Anytime any of them are eating some of this peach, it literally looks like they're just slurping down ooze, and it's just as off-putting as it sounds. And the rest of the songs are pretty bad too. I mean, some are okay, but if I wanted to listen to a song about absurdly large anthropomorphic animals talking about peaches, hello, Jack Black has already given us the perfect song. All of these things are on perfect display when we first meet these bugs, and since I think we turned this movie off after this scene, I was basically going in completely blind and had no idea whether or not the rest of this movie would take place inside this absolute hell. But you know what? It doesn't. In fact, pretty much all of the other things I liked about the first part continued throughout the entire movie after this brief hiatus, except the ants, who should have been in it way more. I'm serious, I was impressed that they put in the effort to dedicate a little bit of time to each of the bugs to make us care about them a little bit more. For the grasshopper, it was about his passion for music. For the centipede, it was that entire underwater battle where he put himself in harm's way to save them, which gave us this magnificent clip.
You are a disgrace to your phylum, class, order, genus, and species.
Say it in English!
You, sir, are an ass.
For the spider, it was about how everyone's always scared of her, which kind of ties into the whole found family thing this movie is doing, and the plot actually manages to be okay. It's just James and these bugs trying to get to New York City, and you'll never guess how they do it. Picture Up, but replace the balloons with seagulls, and replace the house with a giant peach. It's another weird thing that adds some charm to the movie, and anything that takes the protagonist outside of the peach is fine by me. There are some cool obstacles in there, like this robotic shark, which gets no explanation. I like that they Jawsed it and blew it to smithereens, and I like that the centipede is one of the guys in Jaws, which puts them in the same cinematic universe canonically, and I like the part where they accidentally went into the Arctic Circle and had to go into this field of shipwrecks to get a compass, but then the ghosts of the crew members try to kill them, especially because they all look like Jack Skellington, adding The Nightmare Before Christmas to the cinematic universe. And I like that James catches the compass and says, "Ka-chow."
Ka-chow!
Adding cars to the cinematic universe, and the face-off against the Rhino is kind of cool, and I think that it just being a personified thunderstorm is actually a really creative idea. And ending this movie off with a huge speech from James where he tells off his aunts somehow isn't the stupidest thing ever and kind of sort of works. I mean, to be fair, you cannot spell speech without peach, so I have to give him a free pass on this one. It's just how it works. That kind of just sums up this movie. It absolutely shouldn't work, and on many levels, it absolutely doesn't, but it still does. And I know that makes no sense. Let's just put it below Anastasia and above The Lion King 2, which is far higher than I was expecting to put one of the most horrifying things of my early life. Yet another example of expectations being one of the biggest factors of how much you initially like a movie. I hope you don't mind the sort of going through the plot style I did for this segment. It just seemed easier for what I was trying to say. I like all of the characters, I was never bored, and my strange obsession with weird-ass stuff cultivated by a series of unfortunate events has never felt more justified. But Space Jam is definitely next this time, I swear.
I made it! I'm not the one who's nothing, you are! And I'm never going back with you! Not me, not Hermione, you!
Space adventure, it's an adventure in space!
Space Jam is a movie that I surprisingly did not hate. I went in with just about as low of expectations as you can possibly have, but if I gotta be honest, this movie's actually pretty fine. The animation is okay and definitely better than I was expecting. It looks a lot like Roger Rabbit with the way the animation and live action are mixed together, and a lot of the movements are really fluid. I mean, quite a bit kind of sucks, like that part where they turn Michael Jordan into a basketball, which has to be one of the worst animated things I've ever seen in my entire life, and also that part where Wayne Knight gets reinflated later in the movie, which then became the worst animated thing I've ever seen in my entire life. But other than that, a lot of the movie's actually pretty good. I pretty much knew going into this I was gonna hate everything with the Looney Tunes, but then I actually didn't. As someone who's only ever seen Looney Tunes in small clips here and there, and knows almost nothing beyond like most of their names, I was really surprised how much this dumb premise sort of works. I like the idea of a basketball game to save the Looney Tunes from a lifetime of slavery at this amusement park, especially because we never have to waste any screen time actually going there. Somehow they managed to fill up an hour and a half with stuff that doesn't totally suck. Oh no, my basketball gear is at my house. Bugs and Daffy, you have to go on a reconnaissance mission to go get it. Stuff like that, except some of it's interesting, I guess. Honestly, the most boring part of the movie was the half-hour basketball game itself, just because it was kind of repetitive, but even that was fine. Although the bad guys are really boring, I have to say. I don't care about these dumb little gremlins at all, and a lot of this movie takes place on Earth too, which I'm incredibly grateful for. They spend a lot of time actually just trying to make us care about Michael Jordan, and they even managed to make him seem like a sane person, which is pretty impressive considering how he's barely trying.
You guys are nuts.
All of the side characters get just the amount of screen time that they need. Stan is way less annoying than I was expecting, and since I didn't even know Bill Murray was in this movie, I was tremendously happy every time he showed up. I don't think I would have liked this as much if it wasn't as funny. None of the jokes are about to win an Oscar or anything, but it did make me feel positive emotions while watching this movie. The subplot where all of the basketball players who got their talent stolen are going through rehab was actually pretty funny. I liked it. And just the fact that Bill Murray exists at all in this movie is great. I like how every so often it cuts back to Stan just digging this hole. I don't know, it's just a sort of funny movie, I guess, that makes the stupid premise work pretty well. I'll put it below Hercules and above Oliver and Company. There's literally nothing I have to say. Seriously though, don't even pay attention to their rankings right now, because I'll be shifting things very soon, and we'll talk about that at the end of the video. Anyway, decent movie I guess, but now I have nothing to look forward to. And oh yeah, I forgot Lola Bunny is in this. What, were you expecting me to say something else?
I want mommy, I want milk, I want to be held, I want to be comforted. And if you do not do all these things immediately, I will ruin your life.
The Rugrats movie is the first movie I ever saw in a movie theater, although obviously not when it first came out, and even though I was about 2, I still remember not liking it. So will this movie be like James and the Giant Peach, where I find out it's actually good? Not exactly. I almost didn't even do this one until I saw it made $150 million at the box office, at a time when no non-Disney animated movie had even broken 100. To be honest though, it's honestly fine. I wasn't miserable while watching it, and I experienced some level of enjoyment throughout the whole thing. The designs are just as nightmare fuel as I remember, and also they're all gray, so that's kind of weird. You know how like all adult cartoons look ugly on purpose? I hate to say it, but it kind of looks like that. I think it works for the main baby Tommy and also the baby with the glasses, but everyone else's design just makes me feel uncomfortable. And even worse are the voices. Either it gets better as the movie movie goes along, or I just became numb to it after a while, but the start of this movie made me want to pull a Vincent van Gogh and cut off my ears. And this wasn't just for the babies either. It feels like every voice actor in the entire movie is trying way too hard to make the most constipated, or the most nasally, or the most raspier. It's always something, and it just gets really annoying after a while. When those two kids started singing at the beginning, I actually almost screamed.
Like a birdie singing in a tree.
This is not cute. It's probably why most of the songs suck too, but I will say, the main 4 kids actually do manage to be pretty cute. I can't help it, dude. I just think Tommy is the most wholesome and surprisingly nuanced baby I've ever seen. Even the 2 that look like demons from the Shadow Realm contribute to the story in a meaningful way. The story obviously isn't the most complex thing in the entire world, but they don't draw it out too much, and even though some of it was technically filler, I don't really care here. The Rugrats movie cannot be held to the same guidelines as Whisper of the Heart, and by the way, the staircase from that movie cameos here, which is interesting. The whole plot of this movie is basically that the babies get stranded in the woods and their parents are trying to look for them. It doesn't really matter how, but I do think it's kind of weird that every news team in the whole city is willing to give 24/7 coverage of this one situation. Anyway, it ends up being that the first half of the movie is house shenanigans and the last half is forest shenanigans. Obviously, the last half was a bit more boring, but it all ends up being paced pretty well. And the fact that they squeezed 40 minutes of actually sort of interesting content out of some toddlers in the woods is genuinely really impressive. I like that instead of Tommy hating his brother from the start and growing to like him like every other movie, he wants to be responsible and is constantly defending him when all of the other babies want to feed him to the wolves. And that's really cool. Not the wolf thing, you know what I'm saying. And instead of the whole third act breakup thing being Tommy yelling at his brother and then feeling bad afterward, it's the other kids, especially the glasses one, being like, I thought I was your friend and you haven't been caring about me at all. We don't want to waste our time trying to help your brother. Do it yourself. And so he does. And even though the contrived argument between the brothers does happen, it's more of a secondary thing that gets built up decently and has a really endearing resolution. Sure, the Rugrats movie cannot be held to the same guidelines as Whisper of the Heart, but it still kind of follows a lot of them anyway. Somehow this movie made me feel more sadness than almost anything in this video so far. The bar was pretty low, but still, I know the target audience for this movie probably doesn't care about any of this stuff, but that makes the fact that they did it anyway even cooler. Is the movie racist? I mean, it kind of seems like it, but it's from the 90s, so does it get a free pass or something? I don't really know how this works. The Rugrats movie definitely wasn't made for me, but you know what? I still liked it anyway, which is a pretty good indication of a pretty good movie, and I can see how it did well at the box office. Not $150 million well, but inflation does exist, and we know from Illumination that movies meant mainly for younger kids just make a lot of money. You heard it here first, the Rugrats movie is the precursor to Minions 2: The Rise of Gru. Let's put it below King of Thieves and above Only Yesterday. Tommy is the cutest ugly baby I've ever seen, and he makes me smile, and I almost wish I had seen this movie as a kid when I was actually conscious and able to remember it. Whatever, the solitary frame of Tommy's face that was my only memory of this movie pretty much sums up everything anyway. I've been pretty pleasantly surprised by a lot of the movies in this video, but the next one might be the one to break that trend. And it's also the last one we'll ever see in the 20th century.
How'd you get here?
I was kidnapped by that wicked giant.
Oh, a giant!
A giant?
I'm recording this on Christmas, so Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Anyway, I don't know what I was expecting from the Iron Giant, but I definitely wasn't expecting the best movie in this entire video. Dude, this is like the sweetest, funnest, most exciting, most shockingly perfect movie I've seen since, like, last video where like half of the movies were like that. But it's not like that negates how great this movie really is. It's just so incredibly solid the whole way through. Might as well start with what's by far the most obvious positive. The animation is just amazing. The backgrounds are so expressive and colorful in every scene. The details almost remind me of the early Silver Age Disney movies like Sleeping Beauty, but even that doesn't really describe it. I mean, it's not doing anything game-changing, but something about the style still feels unique. And the fact that it takes place in fall in New England makes every single shot so much more vibrant than the bleak, brown, apocalyptic backgrounds I was expecting. But as great as the scenery is, the character designs are right up there too. Hogarth has a really unfortunate and abysmal name, probably the worst I've ever heard in my entire life, but his design is honestly great. He looks pretty average, but in a really expressive way. That's the second time I've said the word expressive, but that really is the best way to sum up a lot of the visual storytelling here, and the Iron Giant himself strikes such a perfect balance of menacing but just still super, I guess, human. You could even call him expressive. I thought he would be made of some really bad CGI, and the first shot of the movie didn't do much to make me feel better, but I can't even tell if he's even CGI at all. And if it is, that's super impressive because so far in this series, we've definitely been able to tell. All of his movements are super fluid, and his voice is pretty much exactly what I wanted it to sound like. The vibe of this whole town is immaculate. The 1950s has never looked more appealing. When I saw this diner for the first time, I legitimately felt some nostalgia for a time period that was over and done with half a century before I was even alive. There's so much soul in every frame of this movie, and you can tell. I also like the part that either accidentally or not makes fun of how pointless hiding under a desk is when it comes to surviving a nuclear bomb, which, believe it or not, actually comes back at the end in exactly the way you're thinking. The characters absolutely carry this story because they're all so damn likable. Hogarth is pretty much just a kid, but his dynamic with the robot is just so good. They go for a sort of How to Train Your Dragon thing with finding humanity in something that's not human, having to keep it hidden, goofy hijinks ensue, you know how it is. Question is though, does it actually work here? Yes, it really does. The joke where they're praying and he's trying to get the robot's giant hand out of the kitchen right behind them is probably one of the best things I've ever seen.
And, get out of here! Satan?
That is an Oscar-winning joke. And honestly, the robot kind of competes with Toothless a little bit. Like, he's actually kind of cute. Plus, his design really lends itself to making him look like an eldritch monster in some shots. But hands down, the best character is the villain. This Inspector Government guy, Kent Mansley. He looks like a combo of Cusco and Gaston, and he's just so funny.
Biggest thing in this town is probably the homecoming queen. Oh my god!
There's a sort of Phineas and Ferb thing going on where this guy is Candace and he keeps trying to prove the existence of the Iron Giant to his mom, the United States government. But in order to get the proof he needs, he transforms from this petty asshole into a genuinely sadistic maniac who is so hyper-focused on killing this robot that he, without thinking, almost kills himself and an entire town. Which is kind of the same thing that happened with Gaston, where he just needs to get what he wants so badly that he kind of loses it. And he's just a really compelling character, honestly. And it all culminates in this perfect ending. I like the thematic choice that the movie only becomes winter once things start getting more desperate after the whole thing previously being in fall. And more importantly, the way everything unfolds just feels so fitting and perfect. I mean, of course they ended it sort of happily, but I still legit almost cried at the words, "I go, you stay." And I like Dean, I like the mom. Honestly, my only complaint with the whole movie is how often Hogarth says the most cringe-worthy statements that make me want to curl up and die. But that's a minor issue, and I can't stress enough how minor of an issue. It's kind of crazy just how perfect the Iron Giant is in every possible way. This isn't a movie where anyone learns any lessons. Like, Hogarth does not learn a single thing across the 80-minute runtime, and neither does anyone else really. The message about not having to be what you're expected to be is clearly present, but is allowed to stay in the background as something for the audience to just think about. For the most part, this movie was made purely to tell a story. The Iron Giant is just a movie where stuff happens, but Jesus Christ, does some fantastic stuff sure happen, and I don't know why I expected anything less from the director of The Incredibles. I'm gonna put this movie below Kiki's Delivery Service and above Toy Story. S-tier movie. It's pretty much exactly what I expected it was gonna be like, just somehow better in every possible way. I was able to predict the entire plot in like the first 20 minutes, but I still came out thoroughly impressed. Not because it contains some brilliant and eye-opening revelation about life, but because it's just there to make you really glad that you watched it. And it does that so well, which is why I encourage every single one of you to check this one out as soon as you possibly can. Alright, 10 more movies checked off. So much for trying to speedrun this one, but at least I have a good reason for this video taking kind of a while, okay? Let's just rank all of these and move on. Apparently the DuckTales movie is in last place, which checks out, I guess, but it's still kind of crazy because I didn't even dislike this movie at all. And even though it's in the third column, I still consider that basically the middle of the list, and it's honestly still a really fun movie anyway. Fern Gully is really tropey and sort of accomplished saying what it was trying to say, but Tim Curry was there to save the day, and so now I kinda like the movie. The Thief and the Cobbler is the trippiest thing I've ever seen, but through no fault of its own, it kind of fumbled the ball with the second half. I do seriously love this movie, but if I ever rewatch it, I'm definitely skipping everything after like 45 minutes. Sorry. I guess we're going up the list, because The Nightmare Before Christmas is a pretty refreshing take on a spooky movie, but other than the main plot with Jack, there's literally zero that I liked. Balto is a surprisingly endearing story of characters that are pretty likable and some stakes that are decently well developed. Space Jam is a stupid idea for a movie, and it never should have been made, but I think I liked it. The Rugrats movie somehow makes a movie about some babies lost in the woods sort of good, and if I was Tommy, I would immediately Dorian Gray myself and keep myself that age forever because he's the cutest thing I've ever seen. James and the Giant Peach has some truly terrible character designs, but a plot straight out of a children's bedtime story that's honestly really fun to watch. The Swan Princess genuinely feels like a Disney movie that I just never got around to watching, with great characters, a great premise, even better execution, and some songs that rival the work of Howard Ashman and Alan Menken. And the one we just did, The Iron Giant, one of the best movies I've ever seen. This whole video, I kept delaying watching so many of these movies because I just knew they would be bad, but it wasn't until I finally put this ranking together right here at the end that I realized that not a single one of them was as bad as I was expecting. Somehow this hodgepodge collection of random movies from random places was more consistently good than Studio Ghibli's output. It just makes it even better that we also ended things off with the best movie of the bunch. And just like that, the 1990s are completely finished. Well, I say just like that, but the truth is, this literally took a year to do. The lows have been lower than I thought we could go. All the way to the floor. How low can we go? But there have been plenty of highs to compensate. The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad was in first place from episode 2 all the way through episode 7, from the 1940s all the way to the 1990s, and in just 10 years, it dropped from first place to 11th. The only question is now, what do we do next? Well, it may seem hard to believe, but we can finally move on to the 2000s now. Is what I would say if I wasn't feeling malicious today. You see, it may seem hard to believe, because it's just not true. I know this is becoming a running joke at this point, but we're actually not moving on to the 2000s right now. Because in case you haven't noticed, my ranking kind of sucks in a lot of ways at the moment. I mean, a lot of the more recent stuff still looks about right to me, but my opinion has changed on pretty much everything from the 1980s back. And so is my ability to make videos actually watchable, and my ability to speak coherent sentences, but we don't need to revisit that.
Animated movies are definitely things.
No, get that off the screen. So what better way to get everyone on the same page about my new and improved ranking than making a brand new video ranking all 94 movies we've done so far, like the Mario Kart one, but just longer probably and better edited because I guess I just want to suffer or something. I'm obviously not going to be repeating every single point I made in all of those videos again, but just in a different order, because I've made roughly 10 hours of every animated movie ranked at this point, and I have no desire to spend 2 years just remaking the stuff I've already made. Basically, just expect everything from the 90s to stay essentially the same, and everything from before that to look quite different. I know it's a big commitment, but there's only a 50% chance that I get immediately burnt out and spend the next 6 months replaying Mario Wonder over and over again. And hey, I like those odds. So I'll see ya, I don't know, sometime I guess, hopefully March, that's my goal.